Naomi Irion was the 18-year-old daughter of Diana and Herve. Herve being a diplomat meant Naomi and her siblings had grown up living all around the world. They'd most recently moved to Pretoria, South Africa. Naomi had grown up surrounded by security and had somewhat of a well-protected childhood. Being 5'11", Naomi had a tough time at school, being bullied for her stature. It was following graduation that Naomi decided she wanted to leave South Africa and begin her adulthood in America. She wanted to experience the life of a typical American teen, date, drive, and meet new people. Naomi's older brother, Casey Valley, a former United States Navy serviceman, had married and settled down in the small city of Fernley, Nevada. Naomi's older sister, Tamara Cartwright, also lived in the US. After a family discussion, it was decided that Naomi could move in with Casey and his wife while she adjusted to a new life in America. It was summer 2021 when Naomi finally moved in with her big brother Casey. With his help, she got her driver's license and bought a car, a $700 '92 Mercury Sable, then gained a job at the Panasonic factory, where she figured she could save up enough money to get her own place and attend community college. Naomi had settled well into Fernley. Despite having to deal with the sexual harassment complaint she had to make at work, she was excelling at her job and her social life was going well. She was dating, using apps like Tinder, Hinge and Bumble. Her last date was on the 11th of March. She had a fun time in nearby Reno. It was Saturday, March the 12th. Naomi had jumped in her car, ready to drive to Walmart. Her job at Panasonic came with the perk of a shuttle bus provided by the company, meaning Naomi would only have to drive a couple of miles to the bus stop at her local Walmart, and the shuttle bus covered the rest of the 30-minute ride to the Panasonic factory. It was 5 a.m. and Naomi headed to the local Chevron gas station to grab an energy drink before heading to Walmart, where she parked up at 5:09 a.m. The shuttle bus arrives at 5:30 a.m, so Naomi sat in her car and chatted to her friends on Snapchat. Her last message goes out at 5:23 a.m, and in that very moment, Naomi's hopes and dreams for the American life were tragically shattered. Unbeknownst to Naomi, as she sat in the safety of her car, someone was watching. At 5:24 a.m, a stranger approaches her car. He opens her door. She shuffles across to the passenger seat as this person drives her away. This would be the last time Naomi was seen alive. It would take Casey 2 days to even realise Naomi was missing. Casey himself worked and had decided to go to bed around 8 p.m. on Saturday night. Because Naomi worked such early shifts, he didn't even realise she hadn't returned home that night, because when he got up the next day, Naomi would have already left for work. It wasn't until Sunday night that Casey and his wife realised something was wrong when Naomi hadn't returned home. Naomi was sensible, reliable, and had been working at Panasonic for months, so for her not to come home was really out of character. Casey messaged family to see if anyone had heard from her, and then made a call to the Lyon County Sheriff's Office to report Naomi missing. Of course, the Sheriff Department typically consider an 18-year-old who hasn't come home as not a big deal, so they weren't particularly concerned about making a missing persons report, despite the overwhelming concerns from Casey. Not willing to sit around hoping that Naomi would return, he decided to call Panasonic to see if Naomi had turned up to work. Because he was named as her emergency contact, they were able to provide the information he needed. And it wasn't what Casey wanted to hear. Naomi never arrived at work on Saturday or Sunday. This was the moment Casey's heart sank. Something was very wrong. Naomi's father had access to her banking details. He was able to see that Naomi hadn't used her bank card since 5 a.m. on Saturday morning at the gas station. With the sheriff not being very helpful, Casey decided to drive to Walmart. When he arrived and saw that Naomi's car wasn't in the car park, he asked the staff if he could view the security footage. As he sat in the office, they scrolled through the footage until they came across Saturday morning, where Casey watched as a strange man paced around the car park before approaching Naomi's driver's side door, opening it, then getting in and driving away with Naomi. For Casey, this confirmed his worst fears. Something bad had happened to his sister. It was now time to give the sheriff another call. Naomi's parents were in South Africa, caring for her 3 adopted younger siblings. It would be Herve, Naomi's father, that would get the first flight he could to the US as the hunt for Naomi began. The security footage didn't provide many clues. The suspect is seen wearing a hood and a face mask. He arrived from an area of the site where a homeless encampment is. He's seen on camera before Naomi arrived, and he circles her vehicle several times from a distance, but never far enough that he doesn't lose sight of her. He even stops to stare at her vehicle. Of course, Naomi, having sat in the car doing the same routine for months without any problems, was completely oblivious to this man lurking around her until he strikes. Just days later, Naomi's car is found just down the road from Walmart. It has been abandoned on an industrial estate. The sheriff can only confirm that inside the vehicle there is evidence the crime occurred, but there is no sign of Naomi. The sheriff's office released the Walmart security footage to the public, hoping to catch a break in the hunt for Naomi. After analysing security footage in the area, they locate footage of a truck. The footage has enough detail that they can determine the truck is a new model Chevrolet 2500 4-door pickup. Naomi's family worked tirelessly to get Naomi's disappearance into the media. Herve distributes flyers in Reno, while Casey and his sister Tamara use social media to spread the word. Naomi's mother Diana does interviews from her home in South Africa. With the help of the public's generosity, though, a GoFundMe campaign is set up, and Naomi's mother Diana is able to gather the funds to fly to the US to be with her family. With the family now united, they continue to do everything they can to help search for Naomi. Their hard work pays off when the Lyon County Sheriff receives a tip. Someone has spotted the truck in Fallon, located about 25 miles away from Naomi was last seen. The truck is seized, and the owner, 41-year-old Troy Driver of Fallon, is brought in for questioning. It's been 13 days since the disappearance, and there is finally a major breakthrough. Although Troy Driver refuses to speak to officers, there is enough evidence to charge him with the kidnap of Naomi. He's held in jail pending a bond hearing. On the 28th of March, Casey and his family sit in the court watching the suspect appear via Zoom. This is the moment they are able to see the person who has taken Naomi. Driver's bail is set at $750,000. If he makes bail, the judge orders he must wear a GPS monitor until his next hearing. He has a court-appointed public defender. As the media gathered to watch the hearing, no one knew that law enforcement had found a body in Churchill County the day before. That is, except for Naomi's family. It wasn't confirmed to be that of Naomi's, and until identification was confirmed the following day. It was a double-edged sword for the family. For 2 weeks, they'd hoped and prayed that Naomi would be found alive. The arrest of Driver had erased their hopes of that maybe Naomi was being held captive somewhere and this would lead to her release. But all hope was now gone. Naomi's family had to begin the hardest process of all, and that is to grieve the loss of their loved one. Following the confirmation of the body's identity, Troy Driver was charged with open murder with the use of a deadly weapon, robbery, burglary, and the destruction of evidence, all charges relating to the abduction and murder of Naomi. According to reports, Driver was working for a company called Leadcore, which operated several mining locations in Nevada. For the past 8 years, he's worked for construction companies. When a former employee of Leadcore recently spoke out on social media, claiming he was working with Driver for 3 weeks leading up to his arrest, it opened the potential to connect Driver to where Naomi's body was found, located next to a mining site. Unfortunately, this guy didn't realise that by speaking out about specific details in an open case can potentially be damaging for the investigation and a prosecution. Driver does have a criminal past. When he was just 12 and living in California, His first brush with the law was for shooting a deer out of season, for which he got community service. 2 years later, he received probation for breaking into a residence and stealing fire alarms, along with burglarising a firearms store. He was then sent to a youth correctional facility after being caught using a gun to threaten another youth. His time in detention would show that Driver did not follow instructions very well and often threatened staff members. Driver had become a habitual marijuana user from the age of 15 and claimed he drank alcohol daily. His criminal career continued to escalate when at 17, Driver and his friend committed 3 armed robberies at stores around Ukiah. They stole small amounts of cash and cigarettes before Driver and his friend became involved in the murder of 19-year-old Paul Rodriguez, who was fatally shot by his 17-year-old girlfriend Alyssa Moore on the 22nd of April 1997. Driver and his friend had both assisted Moore with setting up Paul and luring him to a remote location under the pretense that Driver's mother's car had broken down and needed help. Moore was the one who shot her boyfriend, but Driver, his 19-year-old sister Charla, and his friend assisted with planning the murder and were involved in removing Paul's body and his car. Driver was sentenced to 15 years in state prison for being an accessory to murder after the fact. His probation officer said Driver posed a danger to the community if he wasn't incarcerated. He was released in 2009. His sister fled to Italy, but eventually caught and charged for her role as the getaway driver in the murder. She had spiralled into meth addiction before the murder and was only jailed for 2 years for her involvement. The sheriff involved in the case said that Paul's murder was a thrill kill. Troy Driver seemed to have engaged in criminality from his youth, but the 15-year stretch in jail must have had some kind of effect, as following his release, he'd managed to hold down regular, well-paid work, get a house out in Fallon, and avoid getting into trouble with the law. According to his Facebook account, he was even in a relationship. Driver's previous record showed that he had a penchant for guns and theft. There doesn't appear to be any early indicators that he was abusive towards women. He claimed that he'd committed several armed robberies to get cash to help his sister flee to Italy so she could be with a serviceman husband. His friendship with Alyssa Moore was the reason he'd helped her commit murder. Moore is alleged to have told him that Paul was abusive towards her. He even stole his father's shotgun for Moore to use to commit the murder. He classed Moore as a sister figure in his life. But Troy Driver had been incarcerated at the age of 17. For the next 15 years, he missed out on the important milestones in life. Could this have had some psychological impact on Driver? Was he harbouring some anger and resentment for the years he lost helping his friend? Was he having a relationship troubles? Did something trigger this act? Was he wanting to act out a sick fantasy? Naomi had developed a regular routine, parking roughly in the same spot at Walmart before getting the bus to work. There were other vehicles in the car park. It wasn't a particularly desolate site. There were businesses nearby and cars passing frequently, even at 5 a.m. Yet Driver's behaviour that morning could indicate they had some kind of previous interaction with Naomi in some way, either from watching her or maybe contacting her through a fake dating profile. His actions were naturally confident. He isn't fazed when another car pulls into the car park. The risks of getting caught in this location were high, but he wasn't deterred in any way. There appears to be premeditation at play. Driver had parked his truck away from the site, which meant he'd walked to the car park and laid in wait. At 5 a.m. in the morning, at a closed Walmart store, statistically, how many random young lone females are going to be parked there? Driver lived nearly 30 miles away, so this location wasn't even local to him. So why would he select this parking lot as an ideal random spot to abduct someone? Because he'd approached the parking lot from the direction of the homeless encampment down by the side of Walmart. It initially threw investigators off because they assumed he was a transient. Driver walked several laps of the parking lot before he approached her vehicle. Just minutes before she would have exited for the shuttle bus, this was perfectly timed. Taking into consideration his previous involvement with weapons, it was most likely he used the gun to gain possession of the vehicle and abduct Naomi, although this is not clear on the security footage. Driver was a convicted felon, so ownership of the gun would be an offence under Nevada law. One thing is very clear. Driver was very calculated in this abduction. He was hunting, and Naomi was his prey. After transferring Naomi to his truck, he would drive over 60 miles to Churchill County, a rural site where he could commit his heinous act, then shoot Naomi in the head and chest before callously discarding her remains in the wilderness in a shallow grave. He would then set about attempting to conceal his crime by changing the tyres on his truck to prevent his truck being bound forensically to the murder site. He also destroyed Naomi's phone to prevent it being tracked. Her last ping was in the radius of Walmart. He would return to work on Monday, telling a work colleague he'd been camping with his partner over the weekend. Harbouring his dark secret, while no doubt keeping a close eye on media coverage. Fortunately, Driver wasn't as smart as he thought, because after the security footage captured his truck, an eagle-eyed neighbour of Driver saw a glimpse of his truck parked in the garage and called law enforcement. With his company staff having knowledge of the sites he visited, they were able to finally locate Naomi's body, and once Driver was arrested, his past experiences with law enforcement had taught him one thing: to invoke his right to remain silent. The combined efforts of law enforcement have done an exemplary job in tracking down and detaining a dangerous individual. Sadly, it won't bring Naomi back, but may have prevented further murders. At this point, although Troy Driver has been arrested and charged with Naomi's murder, he is considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. He is scheduled to appear in court in May 2022. According to FBI data, women being murdered by a stranger is extremely rare. Statistically, female victims are more likely to be murdered by someone they know than by a stranger. It's still important that we pay attention to our surroundings. If you're in a dark, isolated spot, double check the car doors are locked. Remember, most cell phones have an SOS setting. A couple quick presses can initiate an emergency call. Be careful what personal information you share when online. You never know who's watching. Naomi's family have expressed their disappointment with the way Lyon County Sheriff dealt with Casey's initial missing persons report. It is assumed that a person must be missing for 24 or 48 hours before a complaint can be made, but this isn't necessarily true. It is dependent upon the individual circumstances. In Naomi's case, there are obviously factors that Casey felt made her disappearance out of character. It is saddening that it was left to Casey to learn his sister was abducted via his own investigation. Naomi was just 18 years old when her life was tragically cut short. She was the beginning of what should have been an amazing new beginning in America.